your most Googled chronic pain questions. I'll be answering them today. Welcome to Slow Roll. My name is Stephanie, a channel dedicated to disability advocacy and helping you get through some tough times. Today, I wanted to get into some questions. I asked Google what your top searched questions are with chronic pain, and I'm gonna answer them. Let's get into it. What is, shocking, chronic pain? So chronic pain at its core is something or a pain that you have that lasts more than 3 months or 12 weeks, depending on it's the same thing. Essentially, it's something that can happen post-injury, post-surgery. It can happen out of nowhere, depending on what's going on. But at its core, it's something that lasts more than 3 months. It's usually not easily fixable and or doesn't necessarily have a quick fix. And it's something that someone will usually have to cope with either long-term or medium to long-term, typically into the years, but not necessarily for the rest of their lives. What is, apparently I'm going to be doing both of these at the same time. What is chronic disease? So chronic disease is essentially chronic pain. The only big difference is that it's diagnosable. So you'll have it's not just, I've got chronic pain in my knee. It could be, I have chronic pain in my knees and joints, and it turns into rheumatoid arthritis. So it's kind of that next step, usually that will require doctor intervention and will require some type of diagnosis. Next up, we got, what is chronic fatigue syndrome? This is a really good question. It's one that we're gonna be hashing out on the channel for quite some time to come. I actually was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome about 6 months ago. It was a diagnosis that was really hard for me to take. It's one that I knew was coming, but it's one of those things that you just hope is not what it is. Chronic fatigue and fatigue in general is something that comes with debilitating disorders, and different conditions have, fatigue as one of their core symptoms. Chronic fatigue just literally takes it to that next level. It is one of those things that is hard to explain, but if you live it, you totally know what I'm talking about. It's one of those things that when you go to bed, you get up, most people feel fairly refreshed or, are ready for the day ahead of them. People with chronic fatigue usually will wake up exhausted. The way I explain it is someone will usually get up, maybe even if they've had a bad night's sleep or something like that, they're at 80, 90% in their, battery life. Someone with chronic fatigue can't get over 50%. Some days I can barely get over 10%. My battery just won't go any higher than that. That's really the core of chronic fatigue. It's something that is not necessarily fixable. There is no official recovery with regards to chronic fatigue. With everything going on with COVID and long COVID, there's a lot more research going on with chronic fatigue syndrome. I am actually very excited for the future of chronic fatigue, people who have been diagnosed long-term, and what this future research could mean for the diagnosis. It's very unfortunate that we've had to have a pandemic and all these people becoming COVID long haulers for this to become a priority, considering how many people are affected by chronic fatigue and chronic fatigue syndrome. I will take it as a win, and hopefully in the years to come, we will have some new research and some new things that we can try out for people like me who suffer from chronic fatigue syndrome. What is chronic stress? It's one that's hard to put its finger on. People with chronic stress are people who have really elevated stress for a long period of time. Really, it's that 3-month mark, that glorious 3-month mark. Everyone just seems like it's the health benchmark. Really at its core, something that your body will not necessarily realize until later on. You'll be stressed for a long period of time, and all of a sudden, you will either break or you'll go into a burnout. That's usually, the word burnout is kind of systemic with chronic stress, Honestly, they kind of mean the same thing. They're just used differently. But at its core, it's someone's body essentially telling it your stress levels are too high and have been there for so long that the body just shuts down and can't cope anymore. Your mental health and stress levels are a key part of that, will eventually affect your body and the way it functions. And I think a lot of people don't take it seriously enough and don't learn how to cope with stress in the proper way and or in a good fashion. It's something that's really important for your daily health, and it's something that I hope to learn more about in the coming years. Stress levels for me have lowered significantly since I stopped working, which has been a good thing for my health. But, you know, being on disability is not an easy thing either. It comes with its own set of stresses and stressors. Really managing those mental health triggers are going to be key to managing stress. Next up, how does chronic pain? So how does chronic pain affect the brain? That is an interesting one. The reality is chronic pain most of the time starts in the brain. As someone with chronic pain, and primarily most of it coming from my brain, it's one of those things that chronic pain does affect the brain itself, but typically it's actually coming directly from the brain. Your pain signals are something that comes from your brain, goes through your nerves, and then goes to wherever the pain is. So at its core, chronic pain actually doesn't affect the brain. It's actually coming from the brain. And so that's something that a lot of people don't quite understand. So at its core, it doesn't affect the brain. It's actually coming from the brain. How does chronic pain affect mental health? Oh my goodness. It has a huge effect on mental health. It's one of those things that your mental health is affected so greatly by chronic pain due to the simple fact of affecting daily life. But for me, my mental health has changed dramatically since I went on disability, since my entire life has changed. I didn't expect the changes to be so drastic, but they were. And dealing with the mental health side of that was hard. I think a lot of it came with learning how to cope with being alone more, learning how to cope with pain itself, because it comes from the brain, and the reality is your mental health is your brain too. And so there's like that constant tug between the two of being fatigued and wanting to do more and feeling like you're not doing enough. That if you do more, you're gonna be in more pain. And so there's like this cycle that you're constantly having to process. I think the biggest thing that I've learned going through therapy and learning some basic coping strategies, which I need to learn more about, but I think at its core, it's about giving yourself some grace and giving yourself the grace, empathy, and sympathy that you would anyone else looking at their situation, but you just can't seem to do it for yourself. And that can be a very strong trait. But at the same time, when you get into hard times, develop chronic pain, it's something that you have to kind of look inwards and give yourself that time and that grace to really, you're learning a whole new life. You're learning a whole new way of doing things. And that takes time, and grace is going to be the easiest way for you to give yourself the time to relearn what life is going to look like with chronic pain for you. How does chronic pain affect everyday life? Oh, well, that worked out really well. It affects it greatly. It's one of those things that I didn't realize how much my daily life was affected until I stopped working. It's the day-to-day things that people take for granted that are the hardest. It's walking wherever you want to go. It's having a shower without passing out. It's being able to trust your arms and legs to just do what you ask them to do. I don't have those things anymore. I don't have that luxury. It truly is something we take for granted until we lose it. My everyday life is highly affected due to it. The easy things of getting dressed in the morning and things like that are some of the hardest parts of my day. I'm very lucky. I have a very supportive spouse that takes on the daily life tasks that, most people would look at a couple and, would look at it 50-50 split. Cleaning, doing dishes, doing dinner, all those things are things that I cannot help in any way, shape, or form. So I've taken on different tasks in the family. I help with administrative tasks and making sure that our health benefits get paid, and answering to emails and following up on different doctor's appointments and stuff like that, which is a huge part of my life due to my chronic illness. It's one of those things that's how I help. I've had to learn to accept that helping in these ways is enough. It's not the same, but it's hard. It's definitely a daily struggle to feel like you're doing enough when I have a spouse constantly running around 24/7 doing everything for me. He's my carer and he's my husband. And so it's one of those things that you have to find that balance, and it can be really challenging. At the end of the day, I'm just lucky to have the support system that I do. I'm grateful for it every single day. How does chronic pain affect the body? So we touched on it a bit in the everyday life comment, but really, I think it's losing trust in your body is probably the most challenging thing. Not knowing with chronic pain, not knowing, you got good days and bad days, and not knowing whether or not today is going to be a good day or today's going to be a bad day. That's kind of one of the hardest parts. It's also learning to manage the effects on your body, learning where are you comfortable, how are you comfortable, so that you kind of have to relearn how to do everything, and relearn those things takes time. And I think that goes back to my grace comment, that it's not going to happen overnight. You are not going to know the full effects on your body overnight. Chronic pain is going to limit certain activities. And yes, that totally sucks. But that doesn't mean the end of your life. It doesn't mean that positive future you saw for yourself. I think it's a twist in the journey. There are ways to maneuver that, but you have to give yourself time, because it doesn't happen overnight. You have to relearn what your body likes, what it doesn't, how it copes with certain stressors, and how it copes with certain movements. And that's just something that takes time. In the last 2 years, I've learned so much about my body, not only from the pain and chronic pain and conditions that I have, but just purely what positions really make it worse, and what makes it better, and what makes it hurt less. And those things just come with time. So give yourself some good old time. And I know that's hard to say. As a person who is the most impatient human I am aware, I know. Everyone tells me I'm impatient, and I know that I am. Chronic pain has taught me a little bit of patience. I'm still quite impatient, but I'm definitely learning patience. It doesn't all have to be bad. As much as I would never want this on any human being on the planet, there's a lot of us out there, but it doesn't mean the end. It doesn't mean the end of our story, and it doesn't mean the end of a positive life future. You just have to take the good with the bad, and it's really truly that sentiment of a glass half full or a glass half empty. At the end of the day, it's the same amount of water. You got to give yourself some time, some patience, and some grace. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode on the Google search and the questions that are highly asked about chronic pain. I would love your comments down below if you deal with chronic pain, what your thoughts are on these questions, and whether or not there are any other questions you would like me to ask Google in the future. If you've liked this episode, we'd love a like to know whether or not we should do another one of these. And if you haven't already, we would love a subscribe if you'd like to join our lovely family of chronic conditions. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and we'll see you in the next one. Don't forget to slow your roll. If you've liked this episode, check this one next.